In our Wonderful Day in the Lord broadcast, we worked our way up to Psalm 142, and we're going to look at Psalm 142 and 143 this week, and then finish up the Psalms, Lord willing, next week. But at 142, let me read the first 4 verses of a relatively sad psalm. It says this: I cry aloud with my voice to the Lord. I make supplication with my voice to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare my trouble before him. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, you knew my path. In the way where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. Look to the right and see, for there is no one who regards me. There is no escape for me. No one cares for my soul. What a sad few verses, especially that last line, no one cares for my soul. Have you ever really felt all alone? In the sense that kind of like David is feeling at this point, that no one really cares for your soul. No one really cares what you're going through, the heartaches that you might be facing, the struggles that you have. No one really cares. That's a terrible place to be, and yet a lot of people are. Loneliness is epidemic today in our society. And it was the first thing that the Lord ever said, even before the fall, that it was not good to be alone. It's not good for a man to be alone, he said, and therefore he made Adam a helpmate. Loneliness is destructive and painful and hurtful, and David is alone. The historical background of this particular psalm seems to have been when he was running from King Saul before he became king himself, and we find that he's probably hiding in a cave. Many of the commentators believe that he wrote 4 different psalms while in this cave, or at least in connection with this time period. Psalms 34, 56, 57, and this one, 142. So these are troublesome times for David, and as he sets down to pour out his despair and his concern, he writes these prayers out to God. Let's try to look at them for a moment. We find him in this cave, apparently, according to the superscription, and he describes his experience in 4 different ways. First of all, he had a cry for help. I cry aloud with my voice to the Lord. I make supplication with my voice to the Lord. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare my troubles before him. And so David is saying, here's what I'm doing. I'm crying out to God. I'm crying out for help. I'm in despair. I'm complaining before God, and this is what I'm doing. Now, at this point, he's not praying. At this point, he's not turned to God. He's just describing to his readers what he's going to do, or what he's in process, perhaps, of doing. And then in verse 3, he actually begins to talk to God. And he says, when my spirit was overwhelmed within me, you knew my path. Notice the change in pronouns. Earlier, he was talking about himself and his voice to the Lord, is crying out to the Lord. But now at this point, he says, now that my spirit is overwhelmed within me, now he says, you know my path. So now he is actually turning to the Lord in prayer. This word for overwhelmed here is a word that has connections with the word darkness. And so he feels in a dark place. Of course, physically, he was probably in a cave. And so he may have gone to the very recesses of that cave to contemplate God, to pour out his heart, to pray. But he's physically maybe in a dark place, but spiritually he is as well. I've had people who have been deeply depressed, who have said to me it was like being in a deep hole, and you couldn't see the top. If you could see anything, it might be just a little pin light at the top. And that's how they felt in their depression. And David apparently felt something like this at this point. He feels overwhelmed by the circumstances of his life. We go on a little further in the verse, though. He says, in the way where I walk, they have hidden a trap for me. So not only is he overwhelmed, but he realizes there's true danger for him. In this case, physical danger. Saul was trying to kill him, and David knew that. And he said then he turns to the Lord, he says, look to the right and see, for there is no one who regards me. There is no escape for me. In ancient times, to look to the right or people on the right would be your best friends, the people you could depend upon, the people you could trust. And David is basically saying, Lord, look to my right. You're finding nobody there. There's no one to take care of me. I'm hiding out in a cave. I have this ragtag army. I've really got nothing going for me. There's no one there. And that's why he ends this verse 4 with, no one cares for my soul. So David feels in deep despair that no one, absolutely no one cares about his situation and his person. I know most of us have probably been there at one time or the other. Perhaps you're there now. We're not going to conclude this psalm. We're going to do that tomorrow. But in the meanwhile, I would encourage you to read this psalm several times, look it over, and especially if you're struggling right now, to give consideration to what David is going through and how he turns to the Lord in the midst of his darkness and despair. We'll pick the last couple of verses up tomorrow, so I hope you can join us.